G'day and welcome to my video. My name is Kyle and I am making this video to summarize and discuss an article that I think is interesting and important. The article is called Punishing Bad Brokers, Self-Regulation and FINRA Sanctions. I think it is interesting because it reveals potential problems with the way Wall Street is regulated. Before I go any further, I want to share something dramatic from the beginning of the article. So that's how I'd like to start. By dramatic, I don't necessarily mean surprising. My guess is that this will be no surprise to anyone holding AMC and GME shares at the moment and for the past few months. Even so, I find it notable to see this written in plain English. In that sense, it is dramatic just to see this on the page, and especially as the topic of an academic article. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about this excerpt from the beginning of the article, which is describing who protects retail traders like me from foul play. The article has this to say: suppose a retail investor believes that the sales representative of the brokerage firm with whom she has an account, her broker, has abused her trust and caused her financial loss. The investor likely wants to recover her losses and to see the broker punished. FINRA, and not the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, is the regulator that primarily addresses her concerns. The first through its arbitration forum, and the second through its disciplinary proceedings. FINRA is the cop on the beat. So I think this topic and this article is important because I suspect poor regulation has led to widespread abuse of market mechanics that threatens the stability of the US capital market. To be more specific, I hold shares in AMC and GME, which I gauge to be highly manipulated. Furthermore, regulatory practices are important to MOAS theory, which is a topic I am very interested in. By MOAS theory, I mean a discussion and analysis, primarily on Reddit, regarding the mother of all short squeezes. Okay, I will end my discussion of my own speculations here because I am not an expert on this subject. My own area of expertise is unrelated. Instead, I will discuss the work of someone who is an expert, this article in particular. So before I continue, please note that my lack of expertise in this area means that my summary and discussion of this work may contain errors and should not be used as advice of any kind. So, the article. The article was published in 2013 by the University of Cincinnati's College of Law. Here's a little picture of what will show up if you Google the article. You'll see who wrote it, a little bit of information about it, and how many people have cited it. So note that articles published as faculty work, like this one has been, can be subject to less rigorous peer review than those published in well-regarded journals, although I don't think that this is the case here. And even so, the approval process involved gives us sufficient reason to take the contents seriously, especially if, like me, we're not familiar enough with the subject to trust our own discretion. Note that this article was also published by Brooklyn Law School, but I couldn't find more information about that. And well, what I mean is that the link to where it was hosted on Brooklyn Law School's website was broken. And I got distracted by something else before looking further into it. So if anyone else is using this article for anything and happens to be watching this video and does know where it is hosted on that other site by Brooklyn Law School, please let me know. Okay, so what is the article about? Well, this is the article's abstract, and I've highlighted a few sections of that for me to read to you to provide an opportunity for us to see what the article says about itself. The article says that regulation of the broker-dealer industry by a self-regulatory organization, an SRO, is an integral part of the federal regulatory scheme. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, the sole self-regulatory organization for US broker-dealers, plays an important role in protecting investors, especially retail investors, and bolstering investor confidence in the securities industry and capital markets. FINRA's enforcement efforts do not garner the headlines that the SEC receives, and there has been little scholarly interest in FINRA disciplinary proceedings. This paper describes the evolution of securities self-regulation and the theory and practice of FINRA sanctions. So there is a lot in this article, and some of which I will present and some of which I will not. The evolution and history of self-regulation I'm not going to be covering. I want to keep this video as short as possible. The key point I want us to have on the table right now at this point in the video is that FINRA is the person that is in charge of looking after us. So in my discussions on Reddit, it's been my impression that the SEC is regarded as having this job. And I think quite fairly, after all, that's the government's arm. But as this article explains, in practice, on the ground, it is FINRA that performs this role. FINRA is the one that's supposed to be looking out for us. The SEC too, but in practice, FINRA. Or at least that's what the article has to say about it. So why self-regulation at all? I think the first question that will come to mind, and it did for me, is how did we get into this situation? Well, maybe because, as the article explains, it is frequently asserted that industry regulators can enforce ethical standards that are loftier than mere legal compliance. So maybe we want the finance industry to regulate itself because they can do a better job. Well, the article explains that good firms want the industry to be well regulated. It is in their interests for the capital markets to be fair and well regarded. In this sense, there are reasons to think that self-regulation is better than government regulation. After all, the industry has the most to gain from effective regulation. Unfortunately, as is often the case, there being some motives or pressures towards a desirable outcome is not enough to guarantee that outcome. So yes, it's true that the industry has an interest in being well regulated, but the industry also has a host of other motives that may direct them towards desiring less effective regulation, especially in some cases. So for what it's worth, I do believe that a somewhat reasonable argument can be made for self-regulation in many contexts. Furthermore, I think the reasons given in this article, broadly anyway, they do fit with what we might regard as appropriate motivations for industry self-regulation. Let the people who have a motive to do it. Regardless, there are also competing reasons, compelling reasons to be skeptical of self-regulation in many contexts. It's worth noting that everyone has a motive to do the right thing all of the time, right? Not just in any specific industry. I have a motive to do the right thing. After all, that's what it means for something to be the right thing to do. It means to have a reason to do it. Yet we don't consider that motive sufficient grounds to abandon our legal systems and police forces, right? Maybe I have a motive to do the right thing, but I also have a whole bunch of other motives to do some things that are not necessarily the right thing. And I think it's true that the finance industry has a motive to regulate itself effectively. However, I also think that many participants in the finance industry have motives that are in conflict with this motive. And I would like industries that I work in to be properly regulated, of course. But wouldn't it be even better, after all, if everyone else were regulated except for me? Okay, I should stop there. I'm now beyond what the article is directly discussing after all. Besides, the article does point out that the SEC is not capable of directly regulating the industry it needs to regulate via itself, right? It needs to regulate them via self-regulatory bodies such as FINRA because it is lacking the resources required to do anything more involved. So in practice, according to the article, self-regulation is here to stay, at least unless there is a dramatic change in the amount of resources allocated to the SEC. So if underfunding continues, or if it ensures continued self-regulation, then we might ask, is this politically motivated? Are there political motivations to allow the industry to self-regulate? Well, I think many of us have our suspicions in that regard, that there are political constraints on regulating Wall Street, but I'm not here to discuss my suspicions. I'm here to discuss the article, and it does point out that there is some pushback from lawmakers against the self-regulatory organizations, or at least the expansion of them. Congress has been hesitant to expand self-regulation. The article explains that both Congress and the SEC have viewed it with suspicion, self-regulation that is, and refer to the natural lack of enthusiasm for regulation on the part of the group to be regulated. Okay, this one actually gets even better because we have this from the SEC. According to the SEC, inherent in self-regulation is the conflict of interest that exists when an organization both serves the commercial interests of and regulates its members or users. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. As I understand them, regulations tend to exist because those requiring regulating are motivated towards misbehavior by some potential reward or gain or otherwise. I understand, of course, that there are some cases, maybe even many cases, where regulations are unnecessary. But I am skeptical that the capital markets are overflowing with well-intentioned actors who are capable of ensuring they act responsibly. And I'm even more skeptical that self-regulation can be accomplished without giving the big players special tools to limit competition from the smaller players. So what does the article give us, though? It gives us an overview of the situation in a very broad sense. Let's get to what specifics we can in this regard. So what does this look like on the ground? To get a little specific, the SEC wrangles the self-regulatory organization. The article says this: an association of brokers and dealers may be registered as a national security association if it applies for registration with the SEC and meets the statutory requirements as well as others prescribed by the SEC. The SEC must make a number of determinations, including that the association is able to carry out the purposes of the Exchange Act and to enforce compliance by its members and persons associated with its members. So just like the excerpt that I started the video with said, the market regulates itself. The self-regulatory organizations register and the Security and Exchange Commission wrangles them. At least that's the broad picture, roughly, as it's presented here. There are exceptions, and the SEC does take direct action, whistleblowers and such, yet FINRA is the boots on the ground. And as the article describes it, for the most part, the government governs indirectly. Hurrah, I guess. So fine, FINRA does the regulatory stuff, but why does anyone listen to them? Well, a little note on the power of FINRA, what authority it has behind it from the article. Which says, the Federal Court of Appeals do not distinguish between SEC orders that affirm FINRA disciplinary sanctions and SEC orders that affirm their own sanctions. Both are considered SEC orders. Okay. They're in charge, and for whatever reason, they have the backing of the government. But what does FINRA actually do? What kind of things do they get up to? Well, the article outlines very broadly by saying that in 2012, for example, FINRA brought approximately 1,500 disciplinary actions against broker-dealer firms and associated persons, imposed fines of more than $68 million, and ordered restitution of $34 million to injured investors. It expelled 30 firms, barred 294 individuals, and suspended another 549 individuals. So yes, FINRA does a lot of stuff, but it's worth noting that numbers like this can be worse than useless when removed from context. They sound impressive, but it's ratios that I am more interested in. As an aside, I'd also like to know how many of these regulatory actions benefited the bigger players, but that's not something we get from this article. We do get some interesting information though. I've selected just one example of the specifics of what this looks like in terms of ratios before I will then finish off this video, hoping to keep it short and sweet, unlike my previous video. Right, so the article tells us that it's important to keep in mind that very few of FINRA's sanctions are imposed after a disciplinary hearing, which is relevant because FINRA disciplinary actions for 2008 showed a total of 274 disciplinary actions imposing bars. Only 16 only in 16 was a hearing conducted in which respondents contested the charges. So the article goes on discussing this, and as it presents a few more specifics, the link will be in the discussion if you want to have a look at the article itself. It goes on to explain that in the majority of cases, contesting the charges brought by FINRA does not necessarily benefit anyone involved, because the charges are brought against an individual who is then, or in some cases, the charges are brought against an individual who is then fired from the firm they're working for. So the action takes place before they get so far as finishing the legal proceedings, so to speak, which might be very effective in terms of preserving, I suppose, reputations involved for the companies. It might also be very helpful, perhaps, in terms of ensuring that these matters do not need to go into lengthy proceedings that require the company to have a very close, hard look. Maybe the person involved has already been pushed out. Now, I'll stop there. As I mentioned, the article will be linked, and you can go down to the final section where more of the specifics are discussed, and you can check whether or not the outline that I just gave there is accurate to your satisfaction or not. So finally then, I suppose it is worth noting, as some kind of defense, I guess, of FINRA, that the FINRA sanction guidelines emphasize the remedial purpose of their sanctions. The article explains that they're not there to punish. Okay, I mean, so I noted that as a defense, but it just kind of isn't, I guess, or at least I find that I have a hard time accepting it as such, even though you might describe it presented in that way in the article, or perhaps more of an explanation, really. As far as I can gauge, it's kind of a damning point in its own right. Not because there's anything wrong with remedial justice. In fact, I'm a big fan in the right context, but because of how odd it feels describing an extremely wealthy industry, the finance industry, Wall Street, as being in charge of its own remediation. I mean, that feeling wrong is hardly a noteworthy point, and after all, my feelings on the matter don't constitute a compelling argument. And so that's probably a good point to finish this video on, or at least a sign that I should stop talking. So thank you very much for watching. There's a link there, and I will also present the link in the discussion or the comments box below the video. I should also mention, if you look at the article, that it provides a brief history of the regulation of the capital markets that covers studies and regulatory developments from as far back as, I think, the 1930s. I found this really cool, but that might just be maybe some damage from my days as a history teacher. I decided not to include any of that content here. This is my second attempt only at a video, and I wanted to really keep it short and sharp this time. Um, Maybe in the comments, those of you that are still watching right at the end could let me know whether or not I accomplished that to any degree. Um, if you want to look at the history and development, it's on pages 29 to 36 of the article, 88, page 8 to 15 on the PDF version. So thank you for watching. I enjoyed making this video even more than the first one. At this point, I'm intending to continue making videos in this format. Hopefully I'll get better at it as I go, but that would be helped if people could let me know what I'm doing wrong, what they would like to see more of, perhaps. Um, so yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to figure out how to stop this from recording.